Well, there have been fears about security ahead of the elections, which are now just a few days away. The two states are highly volatile states to conduct elections, considering what has happened in the past. But let's talk about this and how we can ensure that the Electoral Commission, performs optimally and also the security of lives and property are guaranteed. I'm now being joined from Abuja studios by an election observer and the Executive Director of Partners for Electoral Reforms, Mr. Ezenwa Nwagu. We'd like to welcome you. Thank you for joining us at this time. I must quickly ask you, INEC says they are ready. The police says it's withdrawing security details from politicians and they're ready as well. What's your take? Do you think they're really ready?
Well, thank you for having me. I think it's our responsibility as citizens to oversight their readiness. We move through rituals in every election, so we need to interrogate how logistically prepared they are, especially in the two states that are topographically challenged. Kogi is also riverine, and of course, Bayelsa is almost completely riverine. So that will pose its own challenge. I hope we will be able to, both the media and civil society and citizens will be able to test those preparedness so that we are not caught unawares. We don't get to that point where those things that we know are not just happening on us become an excuse. But having seen elections, different election cycles, I am more convinced that the challenge will not necessarily be the preparedness of INEC. It will boil down to the attitude of the politicians to the elections. It will boil down to the determination of the security agents to remain impartial and professional. If that happens, we're going to see a better election in Kogi and Bayelsa. But if we deploy 66,000 security men and women, as we are being told, in the two states, and at the end of the day, we still see infractions, we still see a lot of that, then we begin to interrogate the political economy of those deployments and begin to see how we can hold people accountable. And that, for me, is the big challenge. In every election, everybody tells us they are prepared. The police says they are prepared. INEC says they are prepared. There are no sanctions. Eventually, we move on. As soon as the election is over, we just move on. And nobody is held accountable for loss of lives. Nobody is held accountable for snatching of ballot boxes. Nobody is held accountable for late arrival of election materials. I think that it will boil down to how much citizens and election stakeholders are able to engage these elections and take really the narrative away from the politicians. This whole idea of calling states volatile, red and all of those things also help in sending wrong signals to the citizens to stay away. And when they stay away, the politicians are then able to carry out their machinations. We will need to seize the narrative going forward and say, look, the elections will determined by the people of Kogi and Bayelsa. If they want peaceful election, if they want credible election,
because you mentioned the political parties. They have signed a peace pact. Aren't you confident that peace pact will ensure that there is peace during the elections?
I think people who don't obey law will not obey a moral document. These things they are very ritualistic. Every election we get politicians to sign peace accord. They signed it in 2019. They signed it in the court-ordered elections. But what is important is that eventually when there is a breach of the law, who is held accountable? A moral document is a persuasive document. Oh, please, Judge, we persuade you to be peaceful and all of that. But there are laws that criminalizes violence in election. There are laws that criminalizes, some of the things that the politicians do that diminish us. So except we hold those laws as supreme, then to extend that to a moral document like peace accord signing is, for me, one of those things that we do to grandstand.
I must ask you, INEC has made known its position in the mode of transmission of results. Do you agree with that? They believe that it's the guideline that they've put forward. Are you so optimistic that that is the best thing to do right now? And I must also ask you, my guest yesterday talked about the responsibility placed on the electorate to ensure that the elections are free, fair. Would you also place the bulk of ensuring peace on the electorate?
Absolutely. That's been, when I say citizens should oversight the process and ensure that they take the narrative away from the politicians, that is actually what I'm saying, that the business of having a credible election would depend on the citizens of both states that they want credible election. The law is very clear as to how INEC should conduct elections. Their guidelines are there. Election is a law-determined process. So if people follow the law, they obey the law, we are going to have good outcomes. What happens is that the political class, and sometimes in connivance with certain elements within INEC, will want to ensure that the people are not in the conversation for good elections. So if they are determined to do that, it then becomes the responsibility of the people to say, look, we want to take away the arrogance of the politicians in ensuring that we are the ones who determine who gets elected. Because if the votes are bought, if they use violence to delegitimize the electoral process, and eventually they get into power, they have no respect for the people. So if you want to be respected, one of the things to do is to take your place within the stakeholdership pyramid and ensure that you do what is right. Coming out to vote is important. One of the things that I feel very uncomfortable about, how, Bayelsa will be bloody, how Kogi will be bloody, those narratives are put out there by politicians to deliberately ensure that people don't come out to vote. But the people themselves must shame them, must disappoint them, and ensure that they come out to vote on November 16th.
We appreciate your time, Mr. Ezenwa, Executive Director, Partners for Electoral Reforms. Thank you for joining us. Still to come on the program, federal government says it has recovered over 200 billion naira in the anti-corruption war. We'll bring you details when we return.